So Richard, thank you so much, and I turn the program over to you.
Thank you, Jim. That was a really nice introduction and very, very illuminating for me to hear, as well as for many of the folks out there. I think what you're attempting to do and doing at Ubiquity University is really great, and the New Paradigm Institute. So thank you, everyone, for being here. Good morning. And yes, we're here for 4 mornings in a row where I will be giving lectures on different aspects of the UFO, UAP phenomenon. And today, each of these will be about an hour, maybe a little more than 1 hour. And I'll be talking about different aspects of this phenomenon. I'm probably going to go back and forth between using UFO and UAP. Forgive me, it's just my habit. I used UFO for many years. I still like that phrase. UAP has its service as well. So today, as part of this overall series, I'll be talking about really the primary evidence why I think you should consider the fact that the UAP is a genuinely real phenomenon. And we're going to get into some of the elements about that world globally. Tomorrow, over the next 2 days, actually, I'll be getting into different aspects of UFO secrecy. So tomorrow I'll be getting into the history of crash retrievals, or as far as we're able to understand, the acquisition of UAP technology. And then on the third day, I want to do something that one very seldom hears, which is attempt to go deep into the actual structure of the secrecy, including looking a lot at the classified, privatized, corporatized elements of UFO, UAP secrecy. I think this is very important. We don't talk nearly enough about that. So I want to hit that on Thursday. And then on Friday, kind of a big picture overview of what is actually going on. What is this? What are they doing? Who are they? How many are they? What's the deal? And what should our attitude be? I'll have some thoughts about that. Before I get started here, I just want to say this is a subject that has a steep learning curve. One of the biggest mistakes that I always see skeptics, even well-meaning skeptics, doesn't matter, that they make about this is they assume that this is an easier subject than it is. They think and I made the same mistake 30 years ago. I thought, oh, well, I'm going to look for a couple of weeks, couple of months into this UFO matter and decide, is this real? Is this nonsense? And then I'm going to move on with my life. Famous last words. Didn't happen that way. What I discovered is that this is a subject where the implications are overwhelming and almost innumerable, too many to count. It's a deep, deep subject, and it involves almost every aspect of human society that I've been able to think about. And we're going to be discussing a lot of these implications. So let me start by sharing my screen, my very boring initial title here, but we're going to move on through. So this is called UFO UAP Evidence Through the Years. Pretty simple, nothing fancy. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ancient world, evidence for ancient aliens, and you're going to hear me. Some of you will like this. Some of you will not like this. It has become my impression, my strong conclusion that most of the evidence for ancient aliens is overblown, not absent, but very overblown. And I want to say this here before I get into the discussion of it. And we could spend much more time on this, and unfortunately, I won't today. But our job as students of this phenomenon is not to just say, oh, yes, everything is true. It's not our job. Our job is to understand objectively, detached, in as detached a manner as possible, what is the factual evidence so that we can understand what's actually happening. If we have an inaccurate idea of the nature, of the length, the duration of the visitation, if you want to call it that, if we have an incorrect idea about that, we're not going to have an accurate idea about who they are and what the intentions are. We need to understand this. And that means, to the best of our ability, it is our obligation as students of this phenomenon to look with a cold eye at the evidence. And that includes the ancient evidence, that includes the current evidence. And that is why I am saying what I am. So let me just go back and share this screen here. So yes, I say the evidence is a bit overblown, still interesting, and we're going to talk a little bit about it. And this is something that's interested me for a long time. I'm a very dedicated student of ancient human history. It's become almost as big an interest of mine as UFO, UAP in general. I'm really into it. I love it, fascinates me. And in fact, one of the reasons that I really got into it was to ask myself, is there a hole in our ancient history that allows for something like ancient aliens, ancient astronauts, and so forth? I'm still looking for that. And I think that there are certain things that are interesting. On the left here, you see an image of what's known as a Wagina. Those are paintings in Australia. They kind of look like gray aliens. That's the truth. Are they? Well, you have scholars debating this, but they don't look like the Aboriginal people of Australia. That is for sure. That painting on the left, I think, is estimated to be about 5,000 years old, so it's quite old. How do we explain it? Don't know. I've been fascinated by the pyramid at Giza for years and years. To me, it's one of the most incomprehensible structures around how that thing was built. You have people discussing this to this day. There are skeptics about, extraordinary phenomena. There are believers in that. And Machu Picchu and other strange, interesting, suggestive things. But the bottom line is, when you deal with some of the old stories, they're not reports like what we have today. They're stories, and they're not systematically discussed or analyzed. We have some archaeological oddities that we could consider such, and intriguing images, as I mentioned here. That's a tough amount of evidence to make a strong case for. Having said that, there are a couple of interesting stories. I'll just run these by you, and we're going to move on. Take screenshots, because I won't be spending a huge amount of time on this. However, there's an interesting story from Thutmose III. This was the dynasty of Akhenaten and Tutankhamun, King Tut. And we have something from one of the Egyptian scribes who just says, in the year 22 of the third month of winter, 6th hour of the day, kind of exact there, the scribes of the House of Life found that it was a circle of fire that was coming in the sky. It had no head. The breath of its mouth had a foul odor. Its body 1 rod long and 1 rod wide. You have to wonder, how did they actually get that measurement? But let's just continue. It had no voice, so we could say it was silent. Get that with a lot of UFO stories, right? Their hearts became confused through it. That is the people. And then they laid themselves on their bellies. They went to the Pharaoh to report it. You have to wonder, what did Pharaoh have to say about this? Did Pharaoh know what to do? After some days had passed, these things became more numerous in the skies than ever. They shone more in the sky than the brightness of the sun, and extended to the limits of 4 supports of the heavens, so they were everywhere. Powerful was the position of the fire circles. I find that an absolutely fascinating story. And although I do sometimes, it sounds like I'm throwing cold water on ancient alien theories and things like this, I'm not throwing cold water on this one. I think that there's something interesting about it. I can't say that I know what happened there. It was, after all, many thousands of years ago. However, it's things like that that do keep me in the game as far as ancient UFO sightings. So let me just do a couple of other little quick discussions, and we're going to move on to the modern era. Vimanas. We've all heard about Vimanas. These are referenced in the Hindu text, the Vedic text. I don't actually, the Vedic texts were written over a period of many years, starting almost 2000 BCE for many hundreds of years after that. I don't know specifically whether it's in the Ramayana or the Mahabharata, where how old the Vimana texts were written, but they're pretty old. They describe chariots of the gods. Literally, this is where Von Daniken got his title from, Vimanas. They were the chariots of the gods. And they were described as speeding through the air at times, as I write here, as brilliant as the sun, and made a noise like the thunder of a storm. What do we say about this? Don't know. It's interesting. I will just caution folks, there are spurious texts of Vimanas, one known as the Vamanika Shastra, which is not an ancient text. It was a channeled text from the late 19th century. This is the one, if you've heard, it shows the Vimana having all of these qualities, including mirrors and Mercury and this and that. That's a modern text. That's not an ancient text. We'll move on. Everyone's heard about Ezekiel and the wheel. Over the years, I've gone back and forth as to what I think about this. I'm not going to leave a comment here. I tend to think this was not a UFO event, but you can think what you want. Ezekiel in the Old Testament and in the Hebrew Bible says, I looked at the living creatures. I saw a wheel upon the earth beside the living creatures, one for each of the 4 of them, like the gleaming of a chrysolite, and the 4 had the same likeness, being, as it were, a wheel within a wheel. kind of a confusing description. You've had people try to figure this out. It talks about rims and spokes, and their rims were full of eyes round about. The living creatures were in each wheel. I think, with a lot of these ancient accounts, I'm going to talk about the Romans here in a second. One of the things I just have to emphasize, and then I'm going to leave this behind, is that when we discuss ancient UFO sightings or encounters, it is imperative that when we do so, we have an understanding of the culture in which this occurred. And this is what I think is typically lacking in most UFO, UAP analysis of ancient stories. We don't really have a proper appreciation of these ancient societies and why they might say some of the things that they've said in this regard. I'll leave it there for now because there's too much else to cover. Now, some of these Roman sightings, and you just take a screenshot for yourself. You can study them later. There's a lot of these out there you can read, of course. Most of these were taken during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, as you can see, and they're interesting. The problem with all of them is that they're brief. They were collected in accounts of sightings and portents of the time, so it's just grouped together, just weird things that people saw. There's not a lot of context there. Here's one from 173 BCE at Lanovium. The sight of a great fleet had been witnessed in the heavens. That's all we have. What does it mean? Could it have been a meteor thing? Could it have been some other atmospheric phenomenon? Totally possible. Keep in mind that the numbers of years between these reports are pretty substantial. You have a century or more between a lot of these sightings. So it's not like they're coming in the way they come in today at the National UFO Reporting Center or MUFON, where we get thousands every year. In the ancient world, you're getting one every century sometimes, or over many number of years. Yes, they didn't have internet, they didn't have newspapers. Their ability to record these was much less than what we have today, so we must account for that. Nonetheless, I think it's fair to say, were far fewer of the sightings that were recorded. You get into more closer to the modern era, the medieval times. I got one from Germany. It's the Charlemagne. It's a famous event where he's attacking the castle of the Saxons at Syburg. And apparently there's the story that they saw this above the castle, the likeness of 2 shields, red with flame, wheeling over the church. When the heathens outside saw this miracle, they were thrown into confusion and fled. Was this a spurious account to create a mystique around Charlemagne? Could very well be. Or could it be something else? Could very well be. We don't know. I have one from China. There's actually many good ones from China and Japan. My own opinion, some of the most persuasive ancient sightings come from China and Japan. Keep in mind, of course, they were also highly literate societies. But even here, there's just not a lot of detail. Here's one I have from 814. Stars emerge from an object. What is this? Luminous object rises, lights up the ground. Many small stars come out of it. Very interesting. This is from a 19th century catalog. Can we make anything out of it? Well, I don't know. Basic assessment, not amazing. Not amazing. It's interesting. There are people who believe that the UFO phenomenon today is the same as the UFO phenomenon in the ancient world. I'm not one of those people. I think that there are very strong distinctive differences. And this matters because, again, it colors our assessment of what is going on today, right now. Doesn't mean that we haven't been observed for a long time, but it does mean you have to ask yourself, what could ancient people really do with our society 500, 1,000 years ago? Our civilization was horses pulling wooden carts. That's what we were. We didn't have computers. We didn't have electricity. There's not much that we were able to do. And so I think we have to recognize there probably wasn't a whole lot that visiting intelligences would have been able to do with us either. And I will argue here and in the next few days that it's really our development into the world of science, getting the key, the fire of Prometheus, which is science, which has allowed us to transform our world, and which I believe probably is what has gotten the attention of the local community, if we can call it that. So that's what I will be suggesting to you over the next few days. But what about Nuremberg? People say, that Nuremberg thing in 1561, wasn't that pretty cool? Wasn't that a situation of ancient an ancient sighting. This is the image. I'm sure you've all seen it. Looks pretty wild. That was UFOs, wasn't it? Oh, I'd say not so fast. I don't believe that it was. Take a screenshot of this next thing. This is the text by Hans Glaser that goes with the image that I just showed you. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I will point out here, take your screenshot. Boom. The point is Nuremberg in southern Germany was in the midst of, this is the century of the religious warfare, Protestants versus Catholics. Martin Luther had only made his impact less than half a century earlier. Southern Germany was the center of the dispute between the Catholics and the Protestants. Nuremberg was very much in the midst of all of that. There was fighting shortly before Glaser's woodcut and after Glaser's woodcut. And when you actually read the text, you're seeing that he's talking about a portent in the sky and a call for peace and spiritual and religious brotherhood. And, you know, we must all learn to get along, this type of thing. Now, you could say, well, maybe the aliens were out there and they were just making, they were observing this interesting part of human society. Okay, maybe, but I think it's every bit as likely, more likely, that this was a call for morality in which something may have been seen. He said at 4 a.m, which was actually, you know, I don't know who was awake to see that. Maybe there are people awake to see that. But I guess I'll just say when I read over the text, I have some doubts about it. So I'll leave it there. Not everyone will agree on this, but I think this is my own considered opinion. So my take, that event may have been invented, but was almost certainly used as a metaphorical call for morality and spiritual awakening, not as a literal description of UFOs. Now, let's move into modernity. This is a very interesting case from now what is Russia, well, what was then Russia too. In 1663, the town no longer exists. It was called Roboo at the time. It's in the northern west of Moscow. And this is one artist's rendition of what was happened. So what we know about is that in the year 1801, a letter was found in a monastic record from a priest to a bishop. A story was related to the priest by a member of the village. And what this priest said is, my goodness, I'm asking for spiritual advice here, bishop. People in the church, they were there, they heard a great sound in the heavens. They all went outside of the church to see what was going on. A large ball of fire came down, arriving from the clearest part of the cloudless heaven, so blue sky. It moved toward a lake, passed over the church. They give the size of this thing is pretty decent size. 2 ardent rays extended. It left, and then it came back. Less than an hour later, it darted from the south to the west and must have been 1,500 feet away when it disappeared. We're translating in terms of units of measure, but nonetheless, came back a 3rd time to the great terror of all those who watched it, moving this way, moving that way for an hour and a half. Quite fascinating. The story said that there were fishermen in their boat who were burned by the heat. The waters of the lake supposedly were illuminated to the depth of 30 feet. The fish swam away, and the water seemed to be covered with rust under the reddish light. That's a lot of detailed description, and it's enough to make me think, I think that may have happened. I think that happened. It's not something in 17th century Russia where a priest is going to lie to a bishop. I think that's very unlikely. The religion was taken extremely seriously. So I think, what could this have been? And, you know, when you look at the actions of this ball of fire or whatever this thing was, this object, it seems to have moved intelligently with purpose. Why it would have selected this particular area at that time is a mystery. Roboo is something of a backwater, it seems to me. There's not a lot going on. And nevertheless, we have this very interesting sighting. And that's one of the things about the UFO mystery that we should always keep in mind, is that these objects do not always play fair. They don't always play nice and make sense. Like, why are they doing what they do? It is our job, our mission, really, to ask ourselves constantly, what's going on when there's a sighting? Let me move into some of the modern cases here, and we're going to get into the 20th century any second. I'm doing a book currently on the history of water-based UFO phenomenons, USOs. This is a case that I am having in this book. This is, I think we can call this a USO case, maybe one of the earliest that I am confident about. Southwest of Martinique in the Caribbean, as you can see right there, 1717, we got the exact date. And it's a very simple report by a French ship. The captain of this ship says that there was a hovering object just 2 feet above the water at 2 a.m. I checked to see how much moon was out. There was some moon, enough probably to be able to see this. He writes, at 2 in the morning, we were making some progress in a southeast direction. We saw something like the mast of a ship pass alongside, standing up about 2 feet above the water. That's it. That's all we have. It's a very brief entry, but then you have to ask yourself, what could that have been? I don't have any answers myself. That's why I've included it in my book. Could it be something prosaic? Sure, I suppose, but it is interesting, and it was obviously taken seriously at the time. Move on. This is a case that I think is somewhat well known to UFO students. This was a case that appeared in a philosophical journal called Philosophical Transactions at the time. A witness, you can see his drawing here. He called it an especially startling incident. In 1742 in London, he just says, like, I saw a light arise from behind trees and houses. At first, I thought it was a large sky rocket. Interesting. Well, there was, we were able to get some fireworks up in the air at the time. He said, but when it risen to a height of about 20 degrees, it took a motion nearly parallel to the horizon, but waved, as you can see as he drew. Its motion was so very slow that I had it above half a minute in view, and then a time enough to appreciate its appearance fully. What was it? Could someone have had a really cool, early firework rocket? It was visible for about 30 seconds. Maybe. It moved in a weird way. I don't know what that was, but I just present it for your enlightenment. Now let's move into the modern era. I'll just say there were some very good UFO sightings of the 19th century. I'm going to bypass most of them right now. Not all are that great, but some are interesting. But what we really see is a major, significant uptick in the 20th century, particularly from the Second World War onward. Why? Well, these are some reasons that I will submit to you. We had a far greater method of detecting anomalies, especially by the Second World War. We developed radar, for example, and electronic means of detecting things. We were in the air much more. I mean, human beings only started to be in the air, of course, in the 20th century. And for those early decades of the 20th century, there were certainly not many of us in the air. So it was still a rarity. But by the Second World War, by the 1940s, well, there were a lot of soldiers in the air. There were many, many more opportunities to see things that would not have been easily detectable on the ground in the past. So those are two reasons right there. But also, I think we must recognize that if you were a visiting entity looking at these human beings, and you've been watching them for century after century, and then suddenly, in the 19th century, you see, oh my goodness, they've discovered how to really use electricity in an effective way. Oh, and mass communications, they got the telegraph, and then they got the telephone, and okay, so things are happening in human civilization. They are rapidly now making a revolutionary advance into increasingly will be our world. Let's take a look at them. And then suddenly you see the First World War, and then, my God, the Second World War, where things really just convulse. Yes, of course, I think that's definitely going to get your attention. Absolutely. And you will then see of course, the two atomic detonations, the three. You have Los Alamos, and then Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And now okay, the kids have gotten the matches, and they have figured this all out. We now need to pay very close attention. So I think that's really what we're looking at. We had better means, and they were more interested. And I think that's what it was. During the Second World War, we had, of course, the Foo Fighters. These were investigated. We know this for a fact by U.S. 8th Air Force, by the OSS, which was the predecessor of the CIA, and by British intelligence. And what's interesting is that to this day, we do not have official conclusions by those agencies as to what this phenomenon was. Did they actually have no assessment, or did they have an assessment? Well, it's still not particularly clear. The records are still As far as I have been able to determine, they are not fully available to this day. After the war ended, we had the first major wave